Hey everyone, you're listening to Dirt Grove Podcast with your host, David Burma.
Sounds good. So we're gonna get started at Dirt Grove Podcast here today. I'm super excited. One of the most exciting podcasts I've done yet, and I don't know if I'll do one that's more exciting in the future going forward because it's just very unique. This is gonna be called a Sunday special, and we're gonna give you a little bit about the journey of my guest and into evangelizing, and that's what I got. Knowledge was just so excited about when I met you was just about the evangelizing, but also your discipleship concept, the church discipleship concept. And I really want to talk about that today. So bit of background: this fellow was a rock star, concert going guy. Did not understand about Jesus or any of that kind of stuff. I believe he'll tell his story. And he goes to the church that I go to currently down at Crossroads. Very exciting place to go. If it's very open to everybody, there's no, we don't put you in a box. But what I love about it is they speak the word, and there's a lot of strong men. And I don't know the height of this guy. He's not a real tall guy, but his confidence is like he's 7 foot. So that's the exciting part. And I want to talk a bit about the confidence day and all this kind of stuff. So I want to introduce my guest, Cory Mckenna, and super excited to have you here.
Dave, it's a joy to be here, man. And with that introduction, I'm feeling a little nervous at this point, man. Yeah, we're all rock stars in our own mind. I want to say that too. So.
Well, right. We got to pull that out a little bit, right?
We do.
And that's a cool part, Yeah. And we'll get going on. I want to hear the story. But this is the other thing that has changed a lot in the last year for me. We all have gifts. Right?
Yep.
We all have natural gifts, and God talks about that. Jesus talked about that, about the talents, right? But I never realized that the natural gifts were supposed to be designed to morph into our spiritual gifts. And we don't live two separate lives. We're not supposed to. It's supposed to be one life, right? We're living. That our spiritual life is married into our natural life, right? And I was not aware of that. And I think you do a little bit of sales and that kind of stuff. Besides, you do a little bit of personality stuff, right? That personality testing and helping people understand, where they're supposed to go in life, and that kind of stuff, which I want to do with my own kids because it's
great stuff. I mean, God redeems all things. Absolutely true. So I would say that He takes our natural abilities, He gives us supernatural gifts, He takes our talents, He takes our experiences, and those things form a call.
Right.
I mean, you're unique. I'm unique. You've had a different background than I have. God redeems all things. None of that stuff's wasted. I'm sure if you look at what you're doing today and you just take a moment and circle back to all your experiences, a lot of them contributed to who you are today if you viewed them that way.
Right.
Some people just throw that stuff away, and I say no. I mean, a real simple point and click for me is I was a singer in a hard rock band, and so when I became a Christian, I was able to lead worship in my church.
Right.
I mean, I lead worship in one place, the Misty Moon Cabaret in Halifax, not there anymore. But, and then I led worship in my church. And so God redeemed that and gave me a heart and passion to direct that toward Him as opposed to other things.
Right.
That's true.
Right. So can you tell us that journey? I want to hear the story. Were you raised in a Christian home, or what was the background for you?
I was raised in a religious home, no real relationship with God whatsoever. So I'm thankful for a Christmas and Easter upbringing.
Sure.
I knew the stories a little bit, but very religious, but no relationship with God. And someone once told me, and man, this is reading my mail. Someone said, rules without relationship lead to rebellion. Think of parenting, man. You give your kids a litany of rules.
Wow,
you have no relationship, I'm out. And so that was sort of my thing.
I like that. I think that's a good parenting 101 right there.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're disciplining your kids a lot, chances are you got to check again to make sure how your relationship is with that child.
Well said.
Right?
Absolutely true.
And once you start having that relationship, then the correction is very little needed.
Right.
Right? And
very
I think
true.
that's I think that's
we
very
want
important.
relational obedience, man. We want them to actually enjoy obeying us, not just biting their lip and doing what they're told.
Right.
Because when they leave the nest, they become rebels at heart and all that stuff. But
sure.
that was my experience. So I'm thankful in one sense for that, but I had no relationship with God. But what always plagued me was a fear of death. It's really unusual. So when I was as small as I can remember, I was scared to die. I was a hypochondriac. I'm an intense guy. You know that, right? And but I was intense in all the wrong ways, and so I was scared to die. So that sort of framed up my early years and after I sort of graduated from my church experience, rules in my household were once you kind of go through all the belt levels, and you can now make your own choice, go to church or not. And I said, well, I'm not going to church. I mean, I thought it was silly.
Right.
And so that was sort of it. And so on that curve, I started singing. I took a bunch of singing lessons, learned to play guitar, started songwriting at like 13 or 14 years old. And then I got in clubs underage. My brother was a hometown rock star. He really was, and really good drummer, amazing player. And so he would get me in these clubs, and I started to sing all original music and we were quite popular at home in Halifax, and it was great. And but I had one born-again Christian friend. And in my church upbringing, born-again, oh, man, those were the weird ones, right? Oh, man, one of those born-again types. So this guy, Greg, was a sweet guy, though. And 100%, he loved God, he loved others, and he would share his story with people, like I'm doing right now.
Right.
So that was Greg, and I didn't want to listen. I was just on a tear, man. I was up to no good, stealing cars at 14, did some community hours, and just a bunch of crazy stuff, and just a bored, rebellious kid, right? And but what happened is I got into my later teen years, and we were about to move from Halifax to Toronto, the promised land of rock music in that time and place. Yeah. I get a phone call. Greg Sullivan, the only born-again Christian I know, is killed on a motorcycle, 32 years of age. I was devastated, man. I mean, I was scared to die. That was my first problem.
Sure.
But he was the only good guy I knew, and God took him. So I knew God was there. I was really mad. So I'm sitting in this funeral. So picture this, hair to my waist, sitting in a funeral in Halifax, listening to this Christian minister share this strange story. I'm like, I'm at a funeral, man. Like take it down a notch. Funerals for me were always really kind of serious and somber and without hope. This wasn't like that. This was a celebration. I'm like, this is weird stuff, right? This guy tells us true story of an Olympic diver, and I've told this story a lot. This is a true story. This Olympic diver had done everything, won everything. He was rich and famous, influential. He'd done it all, but he was scared to die. And I'm like, whoa, that's me, man. Like, and this Olympic diver would roll out of bed in the middle of the night. No one knew he had this pattern of life. He'd go down to the pool on his property. He'd climb up to the 10-meter high diving board. He was a high diver, and he would dive in the pool at night, in the middle of the night. No one knew he did this, but he just wanted to try to clear his head and search it out, and he had all these questions, and he was a tormented guy because he was scared to die. He was successful in life, but not in death, right? So this one night, again, true story, he goes up to the 10-meter high diving board. He's about to dive backwards into the pool, but as he makes that traditional diver stance, the pool's built with a wall in front of him, the moon's behind him, and it makes a shadow of a cross. He's like, what is that? And man, he'd had Sunday school. He'd been told some Bible stories. He was a Christmas and Easter sort of guy like I was. But I'm locked in now. I'm like, whoa, that's intense. And he sees this shape on the wall, and in that moment, there was a supernatural experience he had where he understood that God was good and just, and God's goodness is actually his greatest problem. Because God's so good, he has to punish sin. He knew he'd sin, man. He'd been up to no good his whole life. So God converged all this information, caused transformation, and the guy became a Christian. He repented of his sin. He put his faith in Jesus, and he becomes a born-again Christian. And he goes to bed that night, sleeps peacefully for the first time in his whole life. And I'm like, wow, that's a crazy story. But it got even crazier. The guy gets out of bed the next day. He goes to the edge of the pool to look at his new reflection as a Christian, and he sees that the night before, the groundskeeper had drained every ounce of water in the pool. He was about to dive 10 meters, head first into a pool with no water. True story. And I'm like, man, that's my life. I'm about to dive head first.
Right.
Not just into Toronto.
Right.
That's a bad idea, but into eternity.
Right.
Totally uncertain as to what it holds. So that's really what God used, that story, to start to draw me to get this sorted out, because I was a tormented young guy. And so it was through a series of friendships and sort of, sovereign, providential sort of situations, coincidences when God chooses to remain anonymous, someone said, right? And so all these coincidental things. I end up March 19th, 1995. I went forward and became a Christian myself, and that's when everything really changed for me. And 5 years in corporate after that, working for a Christian businessman was wonderful. But I knew right away I was called to be a leader in the church. I was an evangelistic guy, but I had no example of evangelism. So I went to Bible school, became a pastor, was very thankful for that. But I had this gnawing, no. I've built you to be an evangelist. There was just no 1-800 number to sort that out. And so
I want to stop
you
right there because I'm curious about one part, and I think this is important. When we go down any journey, I break it down in 4 years: family, faith, fitness, and finance. Those 4 areas. Yep. And when we want to be successful in any one of those areas, it's super difficult. Sure. I've never seen any one of those areas, and someone you just look in this world, and there's a playbook.
Right.
Like to go find someone really good to mentor you on relationships, to find someone really good to mentor you in finance, to find somebody really good to mentor you on your Christian journey. It's super difficult.
Yeah.
And there's a very small percentage that actually gets freedom in any one of those areas, I find. Right? So, what I want to hear about is a little bit of the story of your journey. And I don't know if I heard it at the church or wherever. They talked about don't expect to have a role of being an elder unless you got your life in order, right? Sure. And there's a work that needs to happen to get to that spot, and there's a lot of times no mentorship to get there,
right?
And the church believes a lot in this discipleship idea, and it's just sorry about it, but it's just so weird. It's so rare to find that that discipleship in general in life, but even less. I find in churches.
Yeah.
And so, I think you went on a journey to find that, example of what evangelism looks like. And I'm curious what that journey was to find that.
You have got a whole bunch going on with your question. You're right. What your question presupposes is that we're being discipled. I think in the church we have people being discipled, but they're not being disciple makers.
Right.
The Great Commission, Jesus said, all authorities in heaven and earth have been given to me. Go therefore. He didn't say be disciples. He said make disciples. I don't think you've been discipled till you've made a disciple, personally.
I love that.
So think about what you're saying. Most people walk alone in life.
Right.
And what I mean by that is they don't walk alone like they don't have friends, but most people populate their social calendar with people that are just below your faith, just below, because we feel like the king of the mountain.
Right.
And I would say, no, that's a terrible idea. You actually want to trade up. You actually want to find people that are further along, not further back, right? But you're absolutely right. And I think for me,
that's hard to find.
It's very hard. And in church culture, I was expecting. I'd been to use your word, mentored or coached by some amazing corporate guys. Because I think a lot of companies get this. I mean, why would I want to start from ground zero again when I can learn from all those who have gone before me? Right. Like every day is a new day. Why would you want to start by reinventing the wheel again? Why not go find someone who's further down that line? There's an illustration I have to share. I mean, anytime I'm given a microphone, I share this illustration. And it really does wrap up. This really, David, it really kind of wraps together my whole philosophy of life and ministry and my personal experience and my heart and passion and all those things. And it has to do with what I call the ferocious effect of example. So discipleship is really about following my example as I follow the example of Christ. My life verse. Everyone who's a Christian has a life verse. 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Illustratively, you could picture he's got one hand out, right, following Christ's example, but he's got one hand back. He's also having others follow his example. Another translation says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So in a nutshell, my sort of life illustration is when I was a young guy living in Halifax, I've always had an affinity for white Bengal tigers, man. It's my favorite animal on the planet. I had a poster of one on my wall, and I would stare at this thing, and it entered my head when I was just a kid, like, could I buy one of these things? Like, in Halifax. What could go wrong, right? My mom wasn't into this, but I actually did I'm an old guy, pre-internet research, and turns out you can buy a tiger. They're not even that expensive. I mean, 40, 50,000 if you look it up. And apparently, Fact Finder, there's more than 700 pet tigers in Ontario.
Oh, well.
Interesting. But the rules of the game are very interesting. And so I'm studying this picture. So I'm like 13. And the way this works is when the tiger cub's born, it's removed from its mother immediately. It's raised around your family, your household. And over time, it becomes a total product of its surroundings. It becomes totally domesticated, safe to be around. It has no idea of its true identity. The problem is, the warning is, if that tiger ever sees another tiger, locks eyes with another tiger, you are in major trouble. What happens is that ferocious identity is unleashed. It just needs to see an example, and then it becomes what it was created to be, and you are in major trouble. Well, hold that thought. When I ended up, fast forward 2006, so I became a Christian in 1995. Was very thankful for people in my life who showed me the love of God and allowed me to play music in church, but I didn't really have an evangelism example. I didn't even know this was a thing. I did not have one leader in my life who could show me how to share the gospel. They could show me how to pray. They could show me how to be in a small group, lead a worship service, prayer meeting. Not evangelism. So what happened in 2006, it was as though I lost a bet, but a dear friend of mine sent me this video clip of a guy walking in the middle of the street gang, a guy named Kirk Cameron. Do you know who that is? Kirk Cameron's a Hollywood actor, used to be on the show Growing Pains, became a Christian, and Kirk would go in the middle of gangs in Los Angeles and share the gospel. I'm like, this is crazy. I thought it was staged. He's an actor, but it's not staged. So I end up going to Los Angeles 2006, and by God's grace, my first gospel outreach team leader was an LAPD deputy sheriff named Tony. I now call him Tony the Tiger, because when I saw Tony's shorter than I am. I mean, Dave, you kicked off the podcast saying I'm not a tall guy. When you're 6'8", everyone's short, man. Give me a break. Yeah, but here's Tony. And when I saw Tony's example of gospel faithfulness, sharing the good news, loving on the lost, leading people into battle, right, with Bible in hand. I never seen this before. I went, that's me. I'd never seen the example. So whether you're in corporate, whether you're in ministry, marriage, family, fitness, you take your pick. You've got to see a tiger in someone else to be a tiger for someone else. Right. That's discipleship.
Right. It's not being average, right? That's the thing. What you saw a guy that was at the ultimate level, like fully invested, done the work. Had the example, because the example was the work that he was doing. It wasn't like, the guy that's doing fitness that shows up at the gym once a week, right?
And I would say my example. Our ultimate example is Christ himself. That's why Paul says that. And I know you know that. But Tony was a very faithful example, but he was following the example of Christ and others were following him. That's the heart of discipleship. Yeah. But you're right, man. This is not complicated. Right. If you want to become a better hockey player, I would highly recommend you get around Austin Matthews, right? Not the Timbits coach. I mean, nothing against the Timbits coach, but it's the same with your world. Right. This is not a foreign concept. The problem is most people are content, that's a dangerous word in one sense, to be the cream of the crop, I call it. You're just a little bit better than everyone else. It's not until you see a tiger you go, wow, I've got a problem because I'm not doing as well as I thought. And that's a deceptive way to live your life. Right.
And the church, I think that's why a lot of men are not showing up in churches is because they are seeing the cream of the crop, right? They are, and it's like, well, they're not. They can't. They see the tiger. You're talking, but they're not seeing something like wow. And that's what when I came to the church that I go to now, and I met a guy like you and other individuals. It's like, wow, these guys are men, right? These guys are men. These guys really show up. Yeah. And it's not bullcrap. It's not superficial stuff. Yep. Right? It's the real deal. Like they're authentic and they're happy to talk about it. They'll be talking about business, they'll be talking about everything, but they're definitely excited about talking about Jesus and their journey. Yeah. Right?
That's true. And I think it all speaks of where do we get our standards. Do we have high standards for life and ministry and faith and fitness and family, or do we have deplorably low standards? It's just easier to have low standards. So this is why I surround myself with people that are lower than I am, so I feel as though I deceive myself into thinking I'm doing well, when Jesus actually said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. I'm not that. So therefore, there's obviously more to learn. There's more to grow. I mean, we're on the Dirt Grow podcast here. There's always room to grow. If you're green, you're growing. If you're ripe, you're rotten. That's what one guy said. You think you've arrived? You're in major trouble, man.
Yeah, true. I like that. And, work never gets easier. That's what I realized, too. I watch older people, and they still have just as many challenges.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's true. Yeah,
that's crazy.
That's encouraging. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Wow. The Inspiration Podcast with Dave Berman. That's true, though. That's totally true.
Yeah,
that's totally true.
Discipleship.
Yeah.
The word inside that is discipline, correct?
Yeah, that's a root word, and it just means a learner.
Right.
Someone who learns.
Right.
Someone who follows Christ.
And I've actually, I've read or heard topics on this. People like people that are charismatic, right? They love people that have energy, and they think that a lot of times energy is where their success. And I had a friend of mine we talked about, he said, whenever I put my mind to something, it always works. And I says, well, why haven't you put your mind to losing some weight?
Yeah.
And because it works, you say.
Yep.
And he's like, yeah, I just haven't done it. I says, well, do you not care to lose weight? And he's like, well, yeah. Well, then it's more than just putting your mind to it. It takes discipline, right? And a lot of people aren't willing for that, including myself. It's like some of the simplest things you don't want to do because it's methodical, it's disciplined.
But why let's back up the truck a bit. And I totally agree with you. But I've got two single young men at home, my kids, my boys. They're wonderful guys. They're great guys. But I give them this illustration, and it kind of goes like this. When you're a single young man, you are the most irresponsible person on planet Earth. I'm a young adults pastor. I get this. And you picture it like you're on a Kawasaki Ninja. It's that guy on the 401 highway that's just in and out. He's flying as fast as he can. Why? Because there's really no one to be accountable to. There's no one really to care about, man. You're just on your own. But when you get married, now you've got like a 2-seater Miata, and now you've at least got someone to think about, so you're a little more careful, and you're a little more driven, pun intended. You get kids, now you've got a minivan. Man, you got a business or a ministry, now you've got a bus or maybe an airplane. The more people that you actually love and care for, the more motivated you are to get your head on straight. What I would politely say is the reason people aren't motivated to get in shape, the reason people aren't motivated to do more and to grow more is because they're probably selfish and they need to be motivated by someone other than themselves. The way up is down in kingdom living. John the Baptist said, I must decrease so he will increase. Why? Because he was actually motivated by love of God and love of others. I mean, people who I don't want to be too mean to people that aren't fit. I want to be a fit guy, but it's not just because, I want to pretend that I'm Mr. Olympia. It's because I've got people that I love, that I want to set an example for so that they live a more balanced, healthy, and hopefully longer life of service to God. But the reason people aren't motivated, because they're selfish, period.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
And we built the society 100% on that concept.
Yeah.
There's birth control. There's all these methods now that does not allow men to be responsible and show up, right?
Sure.
And we've gone down that route to a point that we don't have to be responsible for our actions and that kind of stuff, right? So
you're spot on. Responsibility is almost a dirty word.
Right.
Membership is almost a dirty word. It's just this illusion and culture that I'm on my own, I can do whatever I want, I can self-actualize, when in fact we know that that's not true. And one point of leadership growth is actually how many people you are influencing and caring for. I mean, you look at King David. When David was out in the field, he's a shepherd boy, lions and bears, oh my. David basically, he's faithful with little. He's faithful with that job. But as he stands before Goliath, his whole case is when I was faithful in little, now God's going to bring us victory here. faithful in much. This guy's going down. And obviously it was God who made that all happen. But think of the influence he had when he became king of Israel. Mm-hmm. Every decision he made had multiplied consequences. Right. Most people, they're just not trying to grow that way. They're just content to be me, myself, and I. That's just not a fruitful life.
So this goes back to the next topic. I feel like that is shame.
Shame?
Shame.
Okay.
And why I say that is because I think men in general, I mean it's women also because I live in the men's world a bit. So men in general, they get convicted, right? And then the devil comes along and says you're evil, you do wrong.
Right.
And so now you're shameful, right? And now we go into another spot, and you've probably been long enough down the other journey that you don't maybe experience that as much. But then they go to another spot where they feel shame and they feel unworthy because of this shame. And what I love about Crossroads is that they're so open to everybody. I was going to, I think twice, evangelizing with you. And we came across a lady that was a Muslim, right? And she's a lesbian. Mm-hmm. And she said to us, she says, would I be welcome to your church, right? Because in the Muslim religion, they're not allowed, right? There's, there's shame, there's, expulsion, there's all that kind of stuff.
Time, yeah.
And I said, well, not allowing you to come to church would be not allowing myself, right? And because I just feel that I'm not a perfect man, and the word is there to convict you of your failings and your sin, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I just I think that's I don't know. I just feel like it's an important part that we encourage people that it's a journey. It's not a ticket to do whatever you want, but it's encourage people to get in that proximity with other people, like we were talking about,
right?
That aren't there to chastise you, but to encourage you into a walk with God.
Yeah.
Right?
That's an interesting point, man. I mean, when we understand the heart of the gospel, which means good news, and it's in a basic presentation as the gospel, the good news that our perfectly just and loving Creator God, who continually blesses us, He's looked upon hopelessly sinful humanity, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, to bear His wrath in our place. And through His death on the cross and resurrection from the grave, Jesus showed His supreme power over sin and death, so that everyone who turns from their sin and trusts in Christ alone to save them will be reconciled to God now and forever for His glory. That's kind of the heart of the gospel. But to your point is a gospel culture in a church is a constant awareness that we need that message all the time, not just the fire insurance. That's the problem. Yeah. Our pastor this past Sunday made a profound statement that I've thought about a lot, where he said, we're good with Jesus as Savior, but not so good with Jesus as Lord. Savior is the, I got my paper stamped, I'm going to heaven. That's where eternal life starts. Eternal life is knowing God and the Son whom He sent. But the lordship issue is what you're describing. It's this constant awareness that, no, there's more to grow. There's further to go. Mm-hmm. You're right. And the shame comes in, I believe, and you've I've got to work that through. But you're right. If we feel shame when we really misalign and misunderstand God's commands for us. So we know that apart from Him, we are nothing, we can do nothing.
But let's go back to shame.
Yeah.
I think 50% of shame is convicted by this world and not even by God. And which is evil in its own sense.
Yeah.
The shame of itself. So when Eve sinned, the serpent was there to encourage her to take part of the tree. The serpent was not there after she took partake of this tree, and Adam and Eve felt shame, right, because they felt naked, right. Who was there to clothe them again when they felt the shame? It was God again. The devil wasn't there to say, "Yeah, you feel shame." Hence, I was the one that made you feel the shame, right? Yeah, and then the devil didn't come along and say, "Oh yeah, I'm here to support you now in your shame," right? So I'm really cautious with people to not go back and forth from that. Hey, this is God convicting you, and then going back to shame. Do you see what I'm saying? I think that's a concern that is in this world a little bit.
And the idea of shame, I mean, certainly Scripture teaches that the God of this age is blind to the minds of the unbelievers. And it more strongly, 2 Timothy says that they're in bondage. They're captive by the devil to do his will. Now, that sounds like crazy talk to people who are not Christian. Like, you're saying I'm in bondage. Yeah, and part of that bondage is shame. It's guilt, right? It's a filthy conscience. But as Christians, I think the idea of holiness, being set apart, is really living life with a clear conscience. We need not feel shame. We need not feel guilt, right? But you're right. Sometimes in the church, we pile it on.
Well, yeah.
Especially with men. That's an interesting thought. I mean, I guess you and I are in a culture where we celebrate biblical masculinity and biblical femininity, and it sounds archaic to people. Right. But yet God's way is the best way. You know, something that's occurred to me, man, and as you talk, Dave, it occurred to me again, is that I think as Christians, we've got to be very, very careful to share with people that God's way is the best way. His standards are the best standards. He knows us better than we know ourselves. Sometimes we're against a whole bunch of things, but we fail to share why we're for the other things.
Yeah.
Is that not true?
Yeah. So I want to get to that point right now. And that's where I was going to go to, was that, so I'm an unbeliever, right?
Yep.
So why would I ever want to follow God, right? What pretenses do I have right now? Like, do I have pretenses that, like, there's so many rules, there's so many regulations? What pretenses do I have right now? And what has the devil told me right up till now?
Sure.
That I'm like, no, it's not for me. Because whenever you bring up the topic to a lot of people, it's like, what's your spiritual journey? And people will talk about ghosts, they'll talk about spirits, they'll talk about all these kind of things. But they don't want to talk about God. So question I have is, like, I'm an unbeliever. I was not going to church. I didn't do all these things. I might feel a lot of, I'm going to digress slightly, and I'm going to go back to this.
Sure.
Just in a Tucker Carlson message there the other week, he talked about the highest death rate in America for men under 40 is fentanyl and suicide.
Wow.
The highest death rate is fentanyl and suicide.
Incredible. I didn't know.
So yeah, so you're talking a generation that I believe doesn't have much hope out there, right? And so how do you encourage them to hey, look into that soul part that it talks about, and you mentioned at the beginning that we all aware of. Despite the fact we want to deny it, a lot of us. How do you...
Hope is you've said hope. Hope is a wonderful, wonderful concept to talk about with any person, Christian or non-Christian, because as image bearers of God, this is sort of a principle, and then I'll answer your question. I'm not going to play the political game and dodge your question and say what I want to say. I was a salesman. I can do that well. I'm just going to get you on my path, right? Regardless, I'm not going to do that. But if you look at just biblically, as image bearers of God, all human beings are unique as God's creatures because we're made in his image. Animals have a nephesh. Animals have a life spirit, right? A dog's got something going on in there, but they're not made in the image of God. They're not moral beings like we are. So image-bearing qualities are where we want to build common ground conversationally. Hope, those metaphysical things, those transcendent things we all desire and want to understand, but we don't. We grasp for those things, but we can't get it. Hope is probably the best one of those things because everyone wants hope. They're hardwired by their creator wanting hope. So like just in terms of apologetics, like the idea of a defense of your faith, the apologetic is a defense. It's the root word. You think of hope. Let's just, as Christians, talk about this for a second. What is hope by definition? It's good to define your terms.
Right.
Right. So much of culture right now is a battle over the dictionary.
Right.
Love. Okay, let's define love. People they assume we have the same definitions, but that can really set things off.
It's true.
Hope, I think, is an expectation of a better future that we haven't experienced yet.
Sure, yeah.
I'm hoping for something in the future, but I'm not in the future.
Right.
So you can only have true hope if you truly know the future, right?
Right.
Who knows the future? Only God knows the future.
Right.
The only way you can have true hope is if you know God, right? So the only hope for the unbeliever is not hope at all. It's actually judgment and justice, right? So I just say that because
say that again. Yeah, the hope that an unbeliever would have is justice and judgment.
They don't have true hope. They have pipe dreams. They have.
But I want to stay with the justice and judgment, which is kind of unique. That I'm agreeing with you. I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah.
I never thought of that. So you're saying justice and judgment because at the end of the day, we all are looking for justice and judgment, even this earth, right? Because we see things that are wrong and we know this is not right and all that kind of stuff. And so we're looking for justice and judgment. So that I never thought of that. Anyway,
yeah, so what they've done is they've arbitrarily said, this is my standard of good. They believe they're good people. I'm not Hitler, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
But if you remember the Easter story, and some of your viewers, whether they're Christians or not, they'll remember the story when Jesus and Barabbas are standing before the Jewish people, and Pontius Pilate says, you can release one of them. And I mean, Barabbas was a bad dude. Insurrection, murder. He was a first century terrorist in our kind of categories. How much worse was Barabbas standing beside Jesus, who's perfect? Right. We're all Barabbas to some degree or another.
Right.
And so you're right. People say, I'm not as bad as Hitler is, but what if the standard was so high it was actually perfect? Matthew 5:48, be perfect. So you have to explain that to folks. But to answer your question, there's a saying in biblical counseling, and in any counseling, you think of someone like Dr. Phil, and I don't know if the guy's a Christian, but he's wise in one sense when he says, until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, people never change. So I led a prayer meeting at our church last night, and one lady came up to me and she said, I've got family and friends who just don't care about the future. How do you possibly help them understand their need? Well, you have to show them where they're headed. You have to show them how fast they're racing toward that cliff. There's a day of judgment coming. You've got to pre-play their future. You know the story. You know how it ends. We know how the story ends. We've got the whole story here. So until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, they'll never change. So you've got to show them a painful outcome, man.
Well, yeah.
You've got to do that.
I ask this question regularly when I ask people about pain. I say, does it take pain for change? You have to have pain to create change. And I get very different answers. A lot of people say yes, and then some say no, and some are unaware. And I ask, have you ever seen anybody that lives in pain but still choose not to change when you yourself know that this would be the method to get out of it? It could be even a natural thing, it could be an infirmity, like some kind of sickness or whatever, and you actually have the solution, and you know the solution, yet they would not take the solution. So the change still isn't, it's too painful to change than the pain itself. Yeah. Right? And I said, okay, so if you could be in a stance where you could live in pain and still not make change, then could you then make change to avoid the pain? Yeah. Right? And so I firmly believe that as long as you become comfortable with the uncomfortable of change in a regular point in all through your life, that you can avoid 90% of the pain that most people experience. Right. As long as you're willing to keep on being in uncomfortable experiences to learn the truth of what is the truth.
And you're hitting to the very heart of what we call gospel witness, Dave, because I regularly instruct Christians to get more comfortable in uncomfortable situations. Most of your opportunities to share the good news are amidst the bad news. It's in crisis. Most people do not become Christians at high points. Give me a break. Right. You ever get the phone call at Christmas saying, "Hey, tell God I had a high year, man. Thanks a bunch." No, it's when they lose their child, when they get sick. Right. It's in crisis most people contemplate the bigger picture, when they realize their humanity and their mortality. And I would say most Christians shy away from that conversation. I'm like, no, man, you want to get very comfortable walking out of funerals and having the hard conversations, because that's when most people think about what we're trying to communicate. But it's not just the Savior piece. I mean, you and I know that when you become a follower of Jesus in this lifetime, everything changes, not just my eternal state, though that's where it starts. What we try to do at our church and through our ministry is we try to submit every category of life to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. I mean, there's a parable Jesus says, build your house on the rock, right? Why? Well, because when it's wisely built, when storms come to that house on that firm foundation, it stands. You can build your house on whatever the heck you want to build it on. Right. But the person who's not submitted to their creator and to obeying their creator, they're building their house. We will build a house.
Yeah.
That's life.
We will.
But is it wisely built or foolishly built?
Yes.
You and I are trying. I mean, we're failing forward here. We're not perfect. Jesus is perfect. But we're trying to build every room of our house on the foundation of the Bible. That's why we want to submit all of our thoughts to him.
Right.
I'll let you know when I get there. It's the other side. I'll never be there in this lifetime, but you'll see that the more faithful you build your house on the rock, the more able you are to make good decisions.
Right. So right. And I the indecisiveness is still a decision.
Yes, it is.
Right. Sadly enough. And,
Yes, it is.
And, you know, my dad showed me this a while ago in the end of chapter 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount with Jesus, was those verses.
Right.
Those who listens to my word and does it
That's exactly
is
right,
a man that builds his house upon a rock. And it was right after 5, 6, and 7. It's at the last verses of 5, 6, and 7. People think it's all the things that he said. No, it was specifically talking about the 5, 6, and 7. And I'll remind people that North America's rules of how these countries were governed were based on Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And as we get away from those rules, you will see our countries crumble.
Right.
And we're seeing it as we speak.
Yeah,
right?
we sure are, because we're sidestepping. You know, an illustration that I often share with young people, old people, anyone who will listen is sort of a trip to the zoo. And you know, I have a friend who his son went to a trip to the Toronto Zoo, and one of the boys in this group started walking his way across the top of the fence surrounding the bear cage, like he's kind of doing one of these things. Only a boy, right?
Yeah.
So the boy actually falls in over the fence, and thankfully there was like a second sort of area whereby there was a fence. There was the area where the zookeeper fed the bear, and then another fence. So he didn't fall into the bear area, but he fell over the fence. So the question is, do you think that the kid dusts himself off and storms to the zookeeper's office and says, "How dare you ruin my fun at the zoo?" The fences are not there to ruin the boy's fun at the zoo.
Right.
The fences are there to ruin the bear's fun at the zoo.
Right.
Now, you can roll with bears if you want to live your life that
Sure.
way, but this is the point. God fenced through his word and his law. He knows the zoo because he's the creator. He knows everything. You can do what you want on that trip to the zoo, but God's saying, if you live life my way, if you allow me, here it is, to fence in danger. You know, we talk about sexual sin in culture. There's huge fences around that type of sin because they have huge consequences. Look, you can jump over the fence, roll with the bear, roll with the tiger, but God's saying, no, my way is the best way. Follow my my word.
Right. That foundation was not just eternal, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
It was also our time here on earth. It was going to be better life here.
Yep.
Not just, you know, in eternity. So
Now, you said something pretty profound, man, and you're saying a lot of stuff profound, Dave. Very good. but no, when you talked about hearers and doers, had a conversation in the small group that I lead, and we talked about the danger of knowledge. And here's the point. Jesus said you hear and you do, and you're obedient. Don't just hear and not do.
Right.
Away from me, I never knew you. Right?
faith
That's a
without
scary.
works. We heard of that yesterday.
Right. And the idea, though, there's a very real sense. Think of you're a fit guy. You've probably had a personal trainer before. No, you haven't? Okay, fair enough. So when you have
I'm
a
only
coach,
so fit. My height deceives you.
right on. but when you have someone who's coaching you in any discipline, right? Even a counselor, and you're getting coaching and counseling from this person, and they say, "Here's what I want you to do for next time." You walk into that meeting, and they say, "So how did it go?" And you say, "How did what go?" "How did it go? What I told you to do?" "Well, I haven't done that yet." "See you next week." I can't take you any further until you do.
Yeah.
Check this out. Jesus said, "The word I've spoken to you will judge you on the last day." There's a very real sense that if people are hearing Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, this is for Christians or those who say they are. If they're hearing Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, but they're not doing, you are accountable for the knowledge you've been given. Why would you gain more knowledge if you're going to continue not doing? Stop going to church and deal with the knowledge you have. I'm being serious.
Yeah.
It's the same with the coaching idea. I'm not going to give you more coaching if you haven't done what I've already told you to do. It's incremental. So there's a dangerous game of people who are hearing, who are even reading their Bible, they're going to church, they're listening to sermons, they've got podcasts, they've got worship playlists on their phones, but they're not obedient to the gospel, they'll be judged more strictly.
Right. That's where
Period.
discipline comes in.
That's intense. Yes, it is, man.
That's where discipline comes in.
So that's where discipline comes in.
Yeah, so we're going to do a small commercial break.
Okay.
And then we'll come back. And I want to talk about men. And how do we encourage men to show up more in life? And I think a lot of the context before will lead into that. So this is impromptu, but tell me a bit about your cross current, and what you do there.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, if you don't mind, and give a little pitch on that.
So I returned back from the United States, burdened for the church, burdened for Christians, burdened for them to see what I've seen and have an example. So I was a pastor full-time at that point, 2006. By 2007, registered a charity called The Cross Current. And the Cross Current, by way of mission, we're a local missions ministry that equips the church by example, we say, to normalize sharing the gospel in your personal and community relationships. So the idea there.
So where do people, like, hey, maybe there's two sides. There's a person that says, hey, I'm interested. I want to know more. I want to participate. And there's people that just want to be like hear the story.
Yeah.
Like hear the good word, and understand a little bit of the truth. Where would they get that information?
Yeah. So if they go to thecrosscurrent.com, that's our main site. And they can find the information on the ministry. They can find videos about what we're up to. Mm-hmm. They can contact us that way. We're big on please contact us directly. Cory, Cory at thecrosscurrent.com. I'm more than happy to talk to people personally. Mm-hmm. We want to be a very relational ministry.
Of course.
So they get basic information on the website.
Your phone number's there too?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. A toll-free number there. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Cory's awesome to talk to. I mean, I want to feed this right into a little story, and we'll get back to what I want to talk about here about helping men. So you talked a little bit about how that you reach out to, the moments you have to people, and even at restaurants, and so I was like, well, how do you do this at the restaurants? And you told me the story. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I'll see it when I believe it, right? And
right. Oh, you have little faith, Dave. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Maybe done it once before.
That's hilarious.
So the first restaurant we're in, and we're just sitting down, and you said to the lady, we're going to give thanks, which we do before we eat. Would you have anything you want us to pray for?
That's it,
right? Yeah. And it was a simple question. It was, it's beautiful because it done a lot of things. It really reaches out, connects with somebody, right? It really shows that you care about something far deeper than how you doing and how you feeling.
Sure.
Right? Because a lot of people is how you doing good, and it connects at such a deeper level in that sense, right? And I think that's really cool. And then you reached out afterwards and said, okay, no, fine, that's fine. If there was something, or whatever. And then you said, hey, you know what? I have 3 important questions, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And just if you have a minute, I'd like to ask you about them. And she came back and said, yeah, I'd love to talk about it, right? And so the 3 questions were, I believe that how is this world created, right? And the other question was, what's our purpose, right?
Yep.
And then what happens after we die?
That's it.
Right. And I think the part that's important is that, you stopped and you listened. Mm-hmm. Right. And you didn't, argue. You didn't debate. You really heard them out, because I think what was beautiful about it was that you gave them an opportunity to think. And when people have an opportunity to think, makes them ask themselves questions.
Totally.
Right?
That's good. Yeah.
And you gave a little bit of feedback afterwards, a little bit of direction. You gave them a little something to read up on afterwards, and that kind of stuff, which I think is, super cool.
Yep.
But it was like, oh, it's that simple. And then so simple, yet I've never done it.
Well, it's funny.
Because
I'll tell you where.
You never think about that when you're there. It's like, oh, I could just. Yeah,
I'll tell you where the story starts. It was birthed out of frustration. And it's funny because for 5 years, I was a Christian working at Swiss Chalet. We call that Christian chicken in Canada.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you have American listeners, but Swiss Chalet would be like your Chick-fil-A. I mean, you don't have anything similar, right? That's
or like a Cracker Barrel.
Like a Cracker Barrel. I mean, Christians go to this place. 5 years, I would serve pastors and congregants. No one ever shared the gospel with me, man.
Interesting.
Far out. Like, how is that even possible? If you really believe that I'm headed to hell. Now, they don't know I'm a Christian at this point. Right?
Sure, of
it's
course
not like
not.
I'm wearing a shirt that says that. But so that's where it started. But
That's interesting.
yeah, that's where it
context.
started. And I think it's just about taking what I call an intentional interest in people. I mean, I love to ask Christians the question, how did Jesus see Zacchaeus in the tree when no one else did? Think about that. He's being sort of like mobbed by this crowd. He addresses this little dude, sycamore fig. I mean, you think I'm short, man. This guy was really small. And I think he was looking when no one else was. Do we even see people as harassed and helpless around us? Does that waitress or waiter or whatever, server, do we see them in truth spiritually? And I think if we actually said, God, give me a heart for people, give me eyes to see, I just think we would be more bold in our witness but for the grace of God, right? But I just don't think we think that way. I think we just leave it at the service. We think the church service is the gospel mission, and it's not. Church services are not the mission.
I think it's one of the most powerful statements you're saying right now. Honestly, because it's honestly it's the smallest details, right? It's the smallest things, and I think like what you're saying is just I think we go out and we're thinking about ourselves still.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And I'm guilty of this. I mean, I came here this morning and I probably had a 5-minute window of margin of error for snow. The 402 is rough, right? So why wouldn't I leave 15 minutes early just in case there's a flat tire and I can be a gospel witness to that person? I do the same thing. I'm not pristine in this point either.
Sure, of
but
course, but
I
it's
love
awareness.
restaurants because they're serving you.
Right.
And I just started doing that years ago, and I was amazed. About 90% of people pray. Now, who they pray to is a whole different discussion, but it's a very warm way to start a conversation. Plus, Jesus sent out the disciples to pray and to preach the gospel. So I think we're in good company when we're doing that way. Yeah, it's
cool.
fun.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I recognized about you, and I'm so appreciative and thankful to call you a friend and to have a person a friend that like rarely do I find people with true confidence, right? And authentic confidence that like I said before, it's easy to have confidence when the people in the crowd cheering you, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to have confidence when 50% of society still like you, right?
Right.
50% may don't like it, but the 50% do. But it's another thing to have confidence when you're sharing a message that is unpopular, right?
Yeah.
And
That's true.
I'm sure some of this comes from God, I'm sure, and some other stuff, but I'm just more curious about, I was in a different podcast, and the one gentleman said, what's the one thing that you'd recommend a young man to seek? And he actually said confidence, which was not what I expected, right? Because we were talking about business and all this other stuff, and he said confidence. So I think it's one thing that's lacking in our society. It's just something that's lacking amongst men. In dating world, women are saying it's the one thing that's lacking. That's a whole different discussion, a whole different topic. But how did you come across your confidence, and what do you encourage the other man to build that confidence and that kind of stuff?
That's a huge question. I would say I've always been a fairly confident guy even before I was a Christian, and I would say I had what you might call worldly confidence.
Right.
And
how does that show up?
That shows up as belief and trust in self.
Okay.
Right, you're talking about self-confidence, right? And that's a thing.
Okay.
I don't want to underestimate
let's just stay with that for a second.
Yeah, so I mean, you look at self-confidence, and it necessitates a couple self-driven things. Number one, my standards of truth have to be self-dictated.
Explain that.
Well, we all have standards for right and wrong,
okay,
good and bad, and if I'm going to
so you have to build a belief system to start with.
You do, and
even if you're not a Christian, start with a belief
everyone
system.
has one. Those three questions you referred to earlier, they actually draw out your fundamental beliefs on where we come from, what's the meaning of life, what happens next, and that frames up a lot of what you're confident about, quite frankly.
So
Right.
so what you're saying, that even if it's not on a spiritual level, not even Christian level, it's just having a truth belief system that you stand behind,
Right.
irrelevant of what the rest of the world believes.
Yeah, and I would say that that is self-driven, though, and I don't want to be
Sure.
too hard on the concept of self, but you have to have a standard of truth that's self. But you also you also have to have your source of trust as self.
Okay, well, and that's fine. I mean, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, and diverging a little bit, because we talked at the beginning that talents can be both natural and spiritual.
Yeah,
right.
sure.
And so I want to understand a little bit about this self-confidence piece and what drives it on a natural side, and you can blend in the spiritual side. But I'm wanting a more just understanding in general. So where I didn't think of that part, honestly. I was not thinking about building some rules around your life and belief system around your life.
We've all got a worldview, and a worldview is basically a network of presuppositions and beliefs that set the trajectory for everything. And those three big questions draw out that worldview. But if you think about self-confidence, worldly confidence, and I don't want to sound really cranky with that, but it's a self-confidence. It's self-love. It's self. I am my own God, right? You will be like God. You'll know good from evil. I mean, it's self-confidence. So the way we're taught to have self-confidence is to find what you're good at, and really your source of strength, your source of confidence is your abilities. Like, keep me in my lane and I'll do fine. So for me, sports, I was pretty good at sports, good at music.
Yeah.
Most people are confident in their lane.
Of course.
Do you agree with that?
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
Find what you're good at and do it. And delegate the stuff you're crummy at.
Right,
You and I know
exactly.
that's true.
So a lot of people haven't found their lane, maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
Would that be true?
Definitely.
Okay. So and it actually goes back to we haven't even talked about this. So you sell, what's that program you sell? Personality testing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and so I'm actually a coach of it's not our program, it's a coach. Yeah, it's called Grip Berkman. It's phenomenal. It's basically
So it's a Berkman type of background of personality testing.
Yes, exactly.
And you have it's a diversion,
a spiritual gift component.
Oh, wow.
So the Grip is spiritual gifts, the Berkman is natural aptitude.
Oh, wow.
And they put those together.
Right.
Because they absolutely true. Those two things do converge to make one confident.
Yeah.
If you know how you're spiritually gifted supernaturally and how you're naturally gifted or naturally wired. I mean, that's the 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Confidence.
So
Would you not agree? Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to stay there for 1 second. We'll go back.
Yeah.
So he speaks in the Bible, be as wise as a serpent and harmless as doves, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, I asked this question: what's the difference between influence and manipulation?
Influence, well, I think leadership, John Maxwell, John Maxwell, he's sort of a leadership guru, Christian guy. Yeah. He says leadership is influence.
Right.
So it's which direction are we influencing? I mean, say a guy like Billy Graham, faithful dude, whether or not I agree with everything he said, but he's a faithful guy, finished well, loved Jesus, as it were. He influenced in the way of life. Adolf Hitler was a leader. He influenced in the way of death, right? I think it really is the motivation that makes one a manipulator. What is my core motivation for my influence? Am I influencing people? It sounds hollow to say positive or negative. Towards life or towards death? That's a more biblical category.
Yeah.
I think it's my motivation as the leader.
Yeah. Yes.
We need to be rightly motivated.
Right. I always say to salesmen, I says, do not sell something that's only going to serve you.
That's good. That's good. True.
Right.
That's true.
If it's not serving the other guy, then walk away. Right. It has to be a win-win. I think that's the difference between influence and manipulation. If I'm selling you something that's only I'm going to be rewarded, that's called manipulation. Right. If it's not serving you for a success for you, it's manipulation. So going back to that part about, I think that's a part that's actually missing in a little bit of this in the Christian congregation, is that we haven't, understood, the true part of being good at sales, in the sense that let's make this a win for you. Let's not be smart at how we deliver it. Be intentional when we deliver it, and make it a win for the next person in the journey of it all. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, they called Paul, theologians call Paul. I mean, these are the academics and the white coat guys. They call him the salesman of the gospel. Paul, the apostle.
Right.
And so if you look tactically and tactfully how Paul did business, he was a salesman.
Right.
He was persuasive.
Right.
He was gentle. He was warm.
Right.
He was others focused.
Right.
I wish more Christians would take some solid sales training, quite frankly.
I agree.
I had 5 solid years of reading books like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Frank Betcher, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success Through Selling.
Yeah.
There are what those gurus do is they basically speak to the image-bearing qualities of people.
Yeah.
Remember people's names.
How to connect with people.
Yeah.
Yeah. How to
Look
care
them in the
about
eye.
them. Yeah.
Remember their names. And
Yeah.
and you don't think
Simple
that becomes
things, but
simple things, but
many
you
people
don't think
do
that
them.
becomes important in gospel witness?
Yeah, 100%.
Valuing people. Paul says the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil. Those are Christ-like qualities because Jesus valued people. What you're describing is being rightly motivated. So how can a Christian salesman be wrongly motivated?
Right.
We're supposed to, right? That's a problem.
Yeah,
man.
I guess if you're
That's a
asking for
problem.
money return or something.
Right, right. And it's all about my heart. I mean, God sees the heart. It's all about your motivation.
100%.
Everything.
100%.
Why you're doing the podcast, why you
Yeah.
go to church,
Yeah.
you know, why you have a beer, if that's a thing, right? There's nothing wrong with any of those things if we're rightly motivated.
Yeah. So going back to that I want to go back to that about being self-aware of your strengths, right?
Yeah.
And building that confidence and that part, which is so funny that you actually train other stuff, which is a Berkman type of thing, and shows people how their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right. And it says, hey, you would be better at, being a teacher, or you'd better be at, being a firefighter. And there's actually through the testing. And I think that's any book that I've ever read talking about, success is all about, number one thing, understand your strengths and weaknesses.
That's right.
Right, number one. So that's really interesting. Self-confidence starts from that point, right? Starts from
It does. Now, the
understanding
game
that.
changes when I became a Christian because now all of a sudden, if worldly confidence is trust in self, Christian confidence is a transfer of trust to Christ. That's the Christian trust in God. You've heard that before, trust in God. And so now my standards of truth become his standards of truth, right? My source of trust becomes him. And of course, that's a supernatural thing that happens. I can't muster that up. It's a gift.
Right.
We'll talk about that maybe before we start recording. But now I'm way out of my lane, man. Let's be honest. I mean, if what we're going with is self-confidence necessitates self-awareness of what I'm good at, now we're called to a great commission that is like so out of your comfort zone. The world's not super into this, right? Let's be honest. And now I need a supernatural confidence that's based in the character and nature of God and the promises of God. I mean, I love to ask Christians this. What would you do for God if you couldn't fail? For real. It's mission possible. What would you do? I mean, that's really the posture of the New Testament. God's given us a great commission. We know how the story ends. Just go and be faithful. Don't think too highly of yourself, right? And so anyway, I'm saying though that Christian confidence actually comes from the standards of the Bible. He's my source. He's my strength. That's what Paul says. So where does that come from? It comes from less of me and more of him. It comes from the way up is down. I must decrease so he will increase, right?
But as a non-Christian, I'm hearing this, right?
Yeah.
What's my motivation to get there?
Yeah, your motivation has to be God and others. That's the whole law of Christ is to love as Jesus loved. So my motivation's love, but
Is there
it's
any
really
would there be any self-love that would get me there?
Would there be any self-love? I would certainly say that, what's boastable, if I could say it that way, boast in the Lord, right? Boast in the Lord. So if I want to go with...
But doesn't it go back to our verses that we talked about, building that house on a rock? Isn't there a self-love, a self-preservation, in a future eternity and that kind of stuff that's kind of selfish? But it's, in a sense.
I would say in the sense of the whole goal of the Christian life through sanctification is to know whose we are, to know who we've been declared to be. That's the tension of the Christian life. You've been declared perfect. You know that? You're perfect today.
Right.
He is perfected once for all time. Those who are being sanctified. So to answer your question, yeah, I think it's the way that I learn to love who I am is in Christ. He has said this of me. He has said that of me. So
So
let's just play the other. Put the shoe in the other foot.
Sure.
You know, you're a fairly sturdy, good-looking guy who
Thanks,
does
bud.
well. I'm being honest, right? So the Bible says that he uses the foolish to shame the wise. Like, it's not the noble things of the world typically, right? It's the people that, man, that's got to be God. Not to be mean. But how do we instill confidence in someone who doesn't have all the looks, who doesn't have all the status, who doesn't have all the abilities? Man, they're just failing around, right? How do you do that? It's got to be supernatural. So it's not as though God only brings guys like you on the job site. It's quite the opposite.
No, I know it is.
Most of the people that have done really faithful things for the Lord are common everyday people because they have to be for, right?
Well, God always got the person. They waited. They waited till Moses said he was 80 years old and couldn't do it.
That's right.
Right?
And
he
even
says,
Jesus himself, the Bible says there was nothing of him that we would esteem as being a handsome guy. I mean, he was an ordinary guy.
Normal guy.
Probably about my height, quite honestly. In that time and place, we kind of know that.
Right.
So I just circle it back, Dave, because if that confidence isn't a supernatural confidence, then it's not available to all Christians. Like God is playing favorites. That's not how this works.
No, right.
We're equal,
Right.
but he takes our abilities, he takes our experiences, he takes the gifts he gives us. This is why it's so important that we are self-aware as to the gifts he's given you.
Right.
The natural abilities he's given you, the experience he's given you. Unfortunately, we don't ever do that heavy lifting to disciple people based on how they're unique in Christ. We just don't do that.
So I want to stay there for 1 second because I think there's one thing that every male wants is that confidence.
Yes.
Right? I think that's one thing that we definitely inside of us, we look up to the other person and it's, wow, that guy's confident. I wish I had that confidence.
Yeah.
Right? More than most things in life, more than money, more than a lot of things we want is confidence.
Right.
Right? And so that's why I want to speak to it because it's kind of elusive for a lot of people. Right? Mm-hmm. It's elusive and you know, a lot of times it's hard to speak of.
Right.
Right? And you know, I mean, yes, there was it's a couple of things. Like I think back to moving to Mexico when I was 17 and going down there, not moving there, but moving when I was 19, and the challenges I had down there, and losing my money down there, and that kind of stuff. And you know, my brother was going through a struggle for a while, and he was living in his truck, right, for probably 6 months nearly.
Yep. He
was in my place. He was renting. He wasn't paying my rent, so I kicked him out, and he's living in his truck for a while. And I was still friends to this day. And he was living in his truck, and I was proud of him. I was like, sure, good for you, man. You would look back to these moments and be thankful for these moments. Be thankful for these struggles. Be thankful for these challenges, right? And you know, it's just, you know, I don't know if it's anything. I'm just talking as I'm going through this. Like, I don't think it's anything specific that I'm coming to. I mean, in a natural sense of confidence, but I think it's, in even a spiritual sense, I would say too that it's that challenging, difficult journey that we're willing to keep on showing up. My dad actually spoke in another podcast. He said, what is how do you know when you're doing it right and success? He says, if you've done today right, just do today right. And it's the difficult moments that you're willing to go through that I think maybe built some of that too, right?
100%. And I would say it's one victory after another and one failure after another. I mean, you think of what one of the most common objections when I do evangelism training, of all things, evangelism's scary for people.
Right.
People feel fearful,
of course,
and ill-equipped. Yeah. Those are sort of the two things: fearful and ill-equipped. And so this is why we liken learning to share the gospel with learning to drive a vehicle. I've seen you drive. You're a little fast, but you're a good driver, right? Most people drive a vehicle, right? And they become confident. They're on the 401. You know, they shouldn't be, but they're checking their phone.
They're so confident they're on their phone and everything else.
Why is that? Well, because they've been equipped.
Right.
And they've had repeated success.
There you go.
Right? And they've been in storm conditions, and maybe they've wiped out once, and they've, you know. So if we could think of it that way, discipleship is really equipping by example and leading people into battle so they have repeated victory. And over time, they become more confident. It doesn't come out of a box, right? No wonder people aren't confident. If you've never shared the gospel, you've had no equipping, you have no example whatsoever, it's just a big question mark. But if you think of driving a vehicle, I pulled into your business here today, and it wasn't like anyone ran out and said, wow, dude, that was an amazing parking job. Can you do that again? But that's what evangelism's like. I come into a setting and they're like, wow, man, I watched your videos. If they drove the car of evangelism, you've been around us enough now. Right. you're not nearly as impressed with me or our gospel outreach team because now you're starting to do this yourself. You're starting to drive the car.
Yeah.
Confidence comes through trials and testing and forward movement, but you've got to get behind the wheel of a car. You've got to pull it off the curb and start failing.
Right.
Most people never get there, man.
I think that's the
They
message.
never get there.
Honestly, I think that is the message. I think that's the message. You know, it's just showing up.
It's showing up.
And trying and failing and trying and failing and trying. What did they say? It's something like 20 some times that the average person tries to quit smoking. Right?
Yeah.
And the question is, if you got 30, is that your number? You know, because it's an average, right? It's an average. It didn't say that, you know, it's 20 for you.
Right.
It's on average, it's some 20 sometimes. So it's like same thing with success, right? It's you know, your amount of times that you have to fail for success might be a lot higher than the next person. Right? Because you're not exactly the same as the next person.
But I don't want to overlook what you said earlier. What we talked about earlier is that I believe the Christian life, and that's my context, is most fruitfully and faithfully lived in the big picture. That is to say, you have got to have a vision of the well done of the Bible. Right. And then work backwards. Goal setting 101. What's the target on the wall? Then work backwards.
Sure.
Most people never, ever get that vision.
Yeah.
You know, you're visionary.
Yeah.
There's visions where we're going.
Yeah.
Directions how we're getting there.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways you can get to the destination. There's one way here, right?
Right. And not evangelism is for everybody and all that kind of stuff. But I wanted to talk on that side, and I also I think it's a responsibility. We all have our own little way and our own little format. This is not the format for everybody. Vision. Yeah, I was
the
going to say
baby step would be this: you need to get a God-given vision for your life that motivates you over those uncomfortable humps. You know, it's like the fitness illustration.
Yeah.
I want to be alive for my wife and kids, right? I want to see my sons get married and I want to have grandkids. So, like, let me shame myself, I'm saying this tongue-in-cheek, out of being unhealthy and overweight and eating stuff I shouldn't eat, because now I have a goal that drives me to take that first step.
Right.
And we need to be driven by eternity. We need to see the outcome and then work backwards. So it's sort of an untenable position for a Christian who's not disciplined. Like, the reason we need to be disciplined is because it glorifies God. It's an example for others. We get over ourselves. But if I think of love God, love others, you know who's not in that? Me. Love God, love others. So this is why signs of Christian maturity, I'm increasingly a greater lover of God and more others focused, right? Christian leadership is less about me.
Sure. So I think it touches on one part about vision. You talked about vision here. Everybody that wants to follow a person, it's because that person had vision.
Yep. That's true.
I don't know of anybody that says, you know what, I want to follow you, but you don't have no idea where you're going, right? And I think if you want to have confidence, you have to have a vision, right? And if you want to lead a family, you have the vision. And if you want to go out there and make a difference, you have the vision. And so the question is where's your vision coming from?
Yeah, and as Christians, I think we've been given the vision, like in the biggest picture possible. We want to hear well done. We want to honor God. We want we want to see Him face to face and hear those words. But I think you're right. In life, we all have a call. We all have something unique as part of our mission. I mean, Jesus brought His Father glory by completing the work He was given to do. What's your work? In a general sense, it's preaching the gospel, making disciples. That's the mission of the church. But you are a unique guy to me. I mean, you have again different experiences, different passions. What I like to ask people: what makes you tick, and what makes you ticked? Because there's a righteous anger you could be given to make a difference. So I think you do need a vision within God's larger vision of preach the gospel, make disciples, bring Him glory. I don't want to lose the fact that each individual walks in a different space and place every day. Your specific walk is different than mine in that sense. So you're right. I think we need to have a direction we're going, a vision for our lives.
Yeah.
Totally true.
So you said two things. One thing in discipleship, two reasons. What do you say? You just said that just now. Two things. Direction of
vision and direction.
No, discipleship and something else. But anyways, the point I'm going to say is that I think I just want to reiterate this one more time.
Yep.
If you're not around a church, around people that do not believe in discipleship, go and relook for that. And it's never been taught to me. This exact comment has never been told to me until going to Crossroads and meeting you. Never. Is that crazy?
Yeah, I mean, it says here.
Let me go further.
Yeah, go ahead, Stringer.
No,
you're the host. I'm going to be quiet now.
I want to go with that. But
yeah.
You know, the church I used to go to, they're like, we are the preachers, and this is the rules you do. And when you come here, you can bring somebody else, but you're not the one supposed to be training and teaching these people. It's only us because we're the preachers. Like, it's not even truth in the biblical sense.
Yeah.
It's not doctrinally true. It's not healthy. It doesn't allow for outreach. I mean, everything is wrong about it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not about the true way that Jesus had talked about spreading the message. Right? And I think that part is just not out there, right?
Yeah, you're right. And when those leaders die, the church dies with it. There's no disciple making.
Well, are they actually leaders?
Well,
I mean,
remember your leaders who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. I was a pastor for 17 years. I say this to all pastors listening because I am one. Most people are imitating their leaders, and that's why churches look the way they look. It's a crude exercise. You disciple not who you want, but who you are. Ultimately, it's duplication.
Right.
It's like parenting.
More is caught than taught.
Yep, 100%. And so the harsh lesson in leadership is the church you have is generally the church you are. And so if you're a product of that, I don't even know what that church is or who those leaders are, but discipleship is just that way. People will follow your example, good, bad, or ugly. We're built to follow the example of our leaders. Now, look, I don't want to go here too far down the rabbit hole, but
sure,
we could look in Canada right now and our leader, and we're to pray for our leader. We're to honor the emperor, as it were. And Paul and Peter both say this. But don't you find in Canadian culture right now, because of the lack of leadership, there's a lack of trust in our culture right now. There's a lack of integrity. I mean, like at the lowest, if you was at the lowest ranks of Canadian culture, no one trusts anyone.
Right.
That's imitation, man.
Right.
So what we want is we want to imitate Christ and have them imitate us. Follow my example, followers, as I follow his example. There's wires disconnected in that leadership model.
Well, I think this is why
100%.
this message we're having right now is so important, and that's why I wanted to have it. Is because I think there's a lot of hungry souls out there. A lot of people that are hurting. A lot of people that are desperate. You know, when you have death, the biggest driving force of death amongst 40 and younger is fentanyl. I mean, you got a lot of heart and souls in this world, right?
You do.
So I think that's an important message. People are looking for a purpose. People are looking for direction. People are looking for people with confidence. They're looking for people with a vision. They're looking for leaders out there. And quite frankly, there isn't a lot out there for people to look for.
And they're looking for truth. It's amazing, man, how you look. You drill down to the bedrock of that suicide problem. And if people understood their inherent value to God, they're made in God's image. You know, there's a story told about you think of the life issue, the abortion issue, and man, I was driving into here, and there was a big, beautiful sort of banner ad on the side of the country highway that basically said, "Don't take my life, take my hand," or something like that. And it's a pro-life poster, and right across it was spray painted "FU." And I'm like, that's intense, man. Like, boy, you can't even understand that fundamental, right? But
well,
we often
somebody got convicted.
Yeah, right. We often share this illustration of a couple. It's really, make it quick, but this couple likes to go to yard sales, and they're at this yard sale, and the wife buys this vase, and it's a really ugly vase. The husband hates the vase. So he stores it in a closet at home. She forgets it exists, and over time, they forget the vase is even there. Years later, they've upgraded to like an auction, and they're sitting at this auction, and at the front of the auction, there's a vase that gets auctioned off for over $1 million that looks exactly like the vase he has somewhere at home, and now he's sweating like, whoa, where's my vase? He gets the vase, he finds it, it's not broken, gets it appraised. It's from the Ming Dynasty, $1.3 million. Now does he throw the vase back in the closet? No, he puts it on the mantle, spotlights. Everyone that walks in, he shows them what changed. The origin is what changed. When he understood where the vase came from,
Right.
it dictated the value of the vase.
Amen.
So when you help someone understand two things, it's two-pronged though. There's responsibility, right, and accountability. You're made in God's image.
Right.
You're fearfully and wonderfully made. I value you because of that. But here's the other side of that coin. You're accountable to your Creator. He's not happy with the way you're living your life. You need to be in a relationship with him. You see the way that works? With that value comes accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
So how is it so easy for someone to take their life? They need to know their value and they need to be accountable. The fear of the Lord brings wisdom and knowledge. We need to open the Bible more in culture. We need people to understand that God is watching, right? And when the Bible stopped being open in public spaces, I mean, the fear of God went down the toilet in culture, and now it's just immoral and it's crazy. But I promise you, if we start sharing the truth with people in love, then they at least realize, oh man, so God's watching me? Right. And not just when you sit at church and give lip service to but when you're surfing the internet too. He's still there, right? That's a huge discussion, man. It's about not being a hypocrite. It's about being a hearer and a doer. A hypocrite is someone who hears and doesn't do, right? Churchgoers, we're all frustrated with that, but someone who's consistently hearing and doing is what we've been called to be, right?
Yeah. Well, man, I expect this podcast to be something that I'll rewatch, and I think people will watch.
I hope so, man. I hope you don't lose viewers, right?
Yeah. You know what? You asked a little bit ago, what's the purpose of the podcast? And I'm like, I haven't even figured that out yet. So if I lose the viewers over this podcast, I do
want to say this. So I was thinking on the way in, man, Dirk wrote, we actually are way more alike. I have a podcast called The Equipping Evangelist, which equips people for seed sowing.
Right.
The Bible, actually, Jesus compares sharing the gospel to sowing seed. It's farming 101. It's an agrarian context. We sow seed, God grows seed. Yeah. And here's what's cool. The qualities are in the seed, not the sower. It doesn't matter how pretty or ugly that farmer is. The same corn comes out of the ground, and that gives confidence in the gospel that he will do what he said he's going to do. So that's important to say.
Amen.
Yeah.
Awesome. I don't have much more to share. I love it, and hopefully this is a help to individuals out there to find a spot of faith, a spot of hope, a spot of confidence for the future, and that they were made for a purpose, right? They all have God-given talents,
absolutely true.
And they can change so much. Is this my brother has this one daughter that has deficiencies, right? And Down syndrome, and they were told they'd probably have it. Do you want to abort and that kind of stuff? They said no, and it's one of the biggest blessings it seems like in their life, because of who she is and her personality and that kind of stuff. And it just comes to me now because we never know what our God-given talent unless we go and search and dig for it.
That's it,
right? And look for it, right? And so we might think we don't have a purpose. We don't have no talent. Like, bullcrap. You all have some talent out there. You all have some strength, and you just haven't dug deep enough to find it yet.
That's right.
So
that's right. And God redeems all those things, man, for His purposes. True.
Awesome. Thanks, Cory.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
This is Sunday special edition of Dirt Grove Podcast. Hopefully you enjoy. If you enjoy, subscribe, and we'll do more of them. All right. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Dirt Grove Podcast, where every Tuesday we dish out the dirt. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and check out dirtgrow.com for more content and episodes. I'll see you next Tuesday. Ciao.